We wanted to do this to help Christians think through their faith. And you've heard me say this again and again and again. We started with very fundamental foundational concepts. Is the Bible reliable? Is the Bible we have right now the same Bible that was written down? We tackled a full half hour on that. We talked through concepts of suffering and how can God be good as well as suffering exists. We talked very cerebrally about that in one episode, and we also talked very practically and very, suffering is real and has real impact, and we talked through stories at that time. We brought in a professor from GPRC to talk about faith and science and how he goes about his job and his career and his knowledge and everything that, as well as his faith, and how he merges the two. And how he encourages, we came away from that encouraging Christians to engage in that field in order to bring their faith to science, but also help science inform what we believe and help us behave differently. We kind of stepped into, we applied that to missions. We brought in a couple missionaries and we talked about, from our church here, and we talked about their experiences and is mission still kind of valid in its current form. And they shared us some of these experiences of theirs on the field to kind of help us think through that and how we want to tackle that very relevant question nowadays. In the new series, we kind of started this fall with thinking critically, a skill set, how to build that. We talked so much about thinking through your faith that we wanted to actually share a little bit on how to do that. And Duff and I sat here and talked through a few things there. And we also, we started applying that skill set that we talked about, to the end of the world thinking. And that's very common if you've been going to church for a long time, or even outside of the church is something that the church always talks about. And if you've grown up in the church, it's something we always think about. So we wanted to tackle that and how a critical thinker applies scripture to our contemporary events rather than applying contemporary events to interpreting scripture. And lastly, we talked a lot about hope inside of that end of the world thinking and how scripture really comes back to that very big theme inside of there. We took that hope and we leapt right into a very serious topic. We brought Carol Carrera in last week, and she very helpfully shared with us her career and her expertise on dealing with people in addiction, suffering from addiction. She talked about how the thinking Christian can help through that and understand that and maybe remove some of the stigmatism that happens in a church. Now, speaking of stigmatism, sometimes when we walk into a church, whether we've been going our whole lives, like the two of us, or whether you're brand new, it can be very intimidating. In fact, if you're a non-Christian watching now and you've never darkened the doors of a church, it might surprise you to find out that sometimes we get a little intimidated because we walk in with our own insecurities inside of a church. Church goes for an hour and a half on Sunday. It's with people that we know from outside of church, of course, but for that hour and a half, everyone's at their best. We're singing, we're listening to a sermon, we're watching our kids run around, everyone looks their best. And it's often can be intimidating when you walk in with your own insecurities and you wonder, is anyone else dealing with the same thing we are? And when you walk into your faith with those kinds of insecurities and those kinds of failings in your life and those kinds of struggles in your life, sometimes it doesn't work to think critically from a top-down level. You very much need to engage in those things specifically. And you need to know that everyone around you is also engaging with those very same things or things that are just as intense. So along those lines, Esther has come in today to share with us, as someone who's been at church their whole life, how everything that we've been talking about in the last 8 or 9 months, 6 months, and especially what we've been talking about recently, how she's engaged in those struggles and the things that she's thought of to resolve those struggles, as well as those things that the struggles have helped her think through and how that's helped her change her behavior. So with that, I'm just going to let Esther tell us a bit of her story, and hopefully she'll be gracious with how often I'm going to cut in on her here.
Yeah, so mine is a story of alcohol addiction, and everyone has some sort of relationship to alcohol, if you're in the church or not, whether or not you decide that you're going to abstain from alcohol altogether or you're going to drink socially or whatever way you approach it. We all have some sort of relationship to alcohol, and mine, of course, began as, fairly normal, and this is the story of how it became an addiction for me, and how I guess I told you beforehand that it was a 10-year journey of knowing it was a problem. It took me about 10 years to actually find freedom.
And that's 10 years of going to church.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
10 years,
going to
10 years of praying and 10 years of singing and 10 years of relationship with Christians.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so I just want to tell a bit of my story, how that
Mm-hmm.
happened with me, and I think it's something that a lot of Christians can probably relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'll just start talking about how that changed, I guess.
Yeah.
And drinking for me was never a big part of my life. As a teenager, I hung out with Christian kids and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. And it really wasn't a big part of my life until I had kids, and basically that's when things for me started to get really hard.
Yeah.
Having young kids, and especially after I had my third son. So
Yeah.
I had 3 boys and had them really close together. And that was the time when I noticed that my relationship with alcohol changed at that point.
Yeah.
And at the time, my husband worked, he was a retail manager, so he worked evenings.
Yeah.
And on some of those evenings that he was gone, I needed a bottle of wine there
Yeah.
to feel like I, could relax or whatever after putting the kids to bed, being by myself for that evening. So this is like, 2 or 3 times a week at this point, but I knew at that point that something had changed.
Yeah.
It wasn't just an occasional thing that,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
you phrased it very carefully there. You needed a bottle of wine beside you to relax.
Mm-hmm.
The word need is kind of a very loaded word when it talks about struggles and addictions.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to be talking a lot about that.
yeah, and it was that feeling of like, if I knew the wine was there, it was okay, I could get through this
Yeah.
evening, and I knew I had this reward. But I mean, at that point, I was still like, I'd say fairly in control of what I was drinking,
Yeah.
and I had my little guardrails about what was happening, but things began to change and progress as they do sometimes with something like alcohol that is addictive. When my youngest was 2 years old, my mom was diagnosed with cancer.
Right.
So the next 2 years were very hard.
Yeah.
She did pass away, and it was heartbreaking, and it really felt like my world had kind of collapsed because I was very close with my mom. I lost, a really good friend, and that was really hard. And so, at that point, I know the drinking changed a lot through going through her illness and her death and grieving. So drinking increased. And though I might have felt in control, I felt like I wanted wine every day, like every night. So
how do you say you felt in control? Like, so you want wine every night, but what's the control part of that?
well, there's certain things that I would tell myself to justify.
Right.
I wasn't day drinking. I wasn't getting DUIs.
Or all the stereotypical things that you
Yeah.
think of when you
Yeah.
associate a drunkenness with drinking.
Yeah, and I felt, that I could say, okay, I need to stop at this point. I had certain amounts that I thought were acceptable,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So that's what I mean by that control. But there was still a dependence there, and it was a very much, it's a physical thing, but it's also mental. And it
Yeah.
was like that thought that like, if I know the wine is there and that I can have that after the kids are in bed, then things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I was really turning to it to deal with the grief,
Yeah.
So
Were you talking to Jesus at this point? We're going to use very Christian language, both of us having grown up in the church. So I'm going to try to preface this for everyone else. But by talking to Jesus, I mean those moments, those introspective moments of how about this God, or help me with this God? Were you talking to Jesus, or had you kind of left that behind for the reward at the end of the day?
No, I was like all through this whole story, I was always, reading my Bible and praying. That was a big part of my life.
Yeah.
And if you could read my journals, there was a lot of guilt coming out on the
Yeah.
page, and like in my prayers and things like that. And there was a period of time after my mom died that I was very angry with God.
Of course.
And
It'd be very weird not to be angry with God at the moment.
Yeah, there was some distance and stuff like that, but I do feel like I was still reaching out. I felt God reaching out to me even in those really hard moments. Yeah, so I guess from that point in my story, like 18 months or so afterwards, after my mom had passed, like that was a really intense time of my grief. I'd say for a year and a half, I felt like I was not doing well,
Yeah.
like emotionally.
Yeah.
It really was hard, but I began to heal about a year and a half in. And of course, I mean, the grief is still there and stuff like that, but the sting of it is less, and you
Yeah.
just can function a bit better.
Yeah.
And anyways, through that, I kind of turned things around a bit. I took several breaks from alcohol where I would try to take like a couple weeks or a month, and I'd try
Yeah.
to take that time off.
Yeah.
And I could always
Did you think in terms of addiction yet? Were you talking in terms of like I've been sober for X number of days, or was it did it not really clue in yet that you would maybe perhaps be addicted to the substance?
I there's so much justifying that I did.
Yeah.
Like I would Google stuff like, am I an alcoholic? And
Right.
it would come up, probably not,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
How many drinks can I have a week and be
Yeah.
healthy, whatever.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. But I think that when I took those times off of alcohol, it was just like, oh no, I'm just doing a fast kind of
Yeah.
thing. I'm fasting from alcohol,
Yeah.
just, and I mean, for those who are watching that don't know what fasting is, it's just taking a break from something. And,
Yeah. To reduce its control over your life.
yeah, just
Yeah.
to try to refocus,
Among other
reset.
purposes.
And then just, my hope was in taking the time off when I eventually went back,
Yeah.
that I could, have like 1 or 2 nights where I wanted to have some wine.
Yeah.
And that was what happened at first when at first I would be doing so much better, but then it would always escalate. So,
Yeah.
and that's the addictive nature of alcohol, in my opinion, is
Is it just the substance as to why it would escalate because you've already engaged in that emotional attachment, or was it a renewed emotional attachment as well? Like you felt the need for it again, or was it just like the chemical addiction, do you think?
I think it was both, and my mindset about it, and the circumstances that sometimes would happen, and just different stresses. There's always stress, there's always reasons
Yeah.
to reach for that wine or whatever, and so that's part of it, I think. So, I mean, like I said, I did lots of different fasts from alcohol. Eventually, like, when I came to give it up for the final time, it's been 2 years now, actually, to the day. Actually, tomorrow is
Oh
my
goodness.
2 year.
Yeah, that's fortuitous timing.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting this fell when it did, but
Yeah.
my stress level had reached a new high point, and so things had escalated with my drinking again, where I wanted to drink every day, and I really found the amounts increasing,
Yeah.
because that just happens, your tolerance goes up and things like
Yeah.
that. And for the first time, well, not the first time, but more noticeably for me, I was physically suffering from it. One of the big things I noticed was my anxiety.
Yeah.
And I've found out since that alcohol really increases your anxiety, and I didn't know that. But I was getting like, physical manifestations of my anxiety, like my face would get really hot, and I would just like get the beating heart and the tight chest and things like that had never happened to me before.
I think there's enough people that struggle with anxiety for one reason or another that we all start kind of thinking back to our own moments when you think through that. So it's very relatable, just and whatever causes it to be like, oh yeah, no, I know what that feels like, and it's a terrible feeling.
Yeah. And I had like mild anxiety, but never to this point. And I had a stressful job situation that was creating some of that, but I know that the alcohol was making it worse, because what I was using to medicate or help me was no longer working.
Yeah.
And I had that realization, that, this isn't working anymore. And my sleep was very much affected too. I would wake up usually in the middle of the night, just really anxious.
Yeah.
Around 3 a.m. And it's just, I've since found out that that's because your body's trying to counteract the sedating effects. So you
Right.
drink before bed, you think you sleep really well,
Yeah.
but then your body will start counteracting that and it'll wake you up at like 3 in the morning. So
Right.
anyways, all this stuff had happened and I was just feeling like not good most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so this really caused me to look at things differently, I guess, and know that I needed to make a change.
Right.
So, yeah, I began what I thought would just be another little fast. I didn't really know that this was the final time for me.
Yeah.
But through, I credit like a few different things to what made it last for me, what made me make the change, I guess. There was well, and I shared this with you.
Yeah.
Like all through my journey, I felt like God was always with me, and I really felt Him pursuing me, trying to help me get freedom, and I never felt that He turned His back on me. But I felt so much guilt that it was hard to sometimes
hear it.
To hear it, to recognize it. But I feel like He gave me a dream, and where He gave me a name.
Right.
And I can't remember the details, it's fuzzy, but it was like I was in the presence of God and I couldn't see Him. I could hear Him, and He said, I'm giving you a name, and your name is Desperate for God.
Yeah.
And it made so much sense to me when I woke up, because I knew that that's what I needed.
Yeah.
I needed God to be the thing that I was turning to.
Yeah.
That's what I was desperate for. And I was trying to fill myself and gain something from something, like wine that will never give it to you. And so that dream happened a couple days before I decided, okay, I'm gonna take a break.
Yeah.
And also I came across a book that really helped me change my mindset. And it's a secular book, but it's really, like, I shared a verse with you. So 1 Corinthians 6:12 says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. And this book, for me, it just showed me that, yeah, alcohol is okay. And some people have a fine relationship with it, but when it's not benefiting you, you really have to look at what are you believing about it.
Yeah.
And this book is called This Naked Mind, and it's by Annie Grace, and she's like systematically goes through all the lies that alcohol tells us,
Right.
or that we believe,
About its effects and everything.
Yeah, like that it's going to relieve my stress, and
Right.
then she goes into the science behind what it actually does, and she goes through every point imaginable.
So was that book very instrumental in you permanently quitting, or was it just a wake-up call that along with quitting?
I think it was really instrumental, but I think it was everything coming together at the right time.
Right.
Because I think that I had been pursuing like an alcohol-free lifestyle, like trying it, knowing I felt better, but I just needed like the push of like the knowledge of like what I was actually doing to my body.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was just that missing piece for me, because I couldn't, like before, I always had the mental piece was like, I want to still drink, I need that, I want that. And then when I realized what it was actually doing to my body, it somehow, and like I shouldn't credit it just to her, because I think God, of course, God was working through it and healing me.
Yeah. Well, I think that's been the emphasis of this series too, is that the things that we learn from Scripture directly, as you shared, but also from when we talk to scientists and we talk to people, the things that we learn help us to live out our faith, inform our faith. So I mean, this is very real. Just because it comes from a secular source doesn't mean it's not just as impactful and sacred in a way in the impact of our relationship with God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, like I think that so many things came together at the right time just to make the mindset change. And I feel like I have a freedom now that I don't want to drink, and I never thought that that would happen. And in that way, I feel like I was healed. Like, and I think that would be something only God could do, is take away something like that.
So along those lines then, that you say only God can do, what have you learned about God through this journey? I know you've grown up in the church, and you've definitely, known of God and had a relationship with God this time. Were there any surprises along the way of learning about his character, how he looks at you? You talked about guilt before. How has that changed through this process?
Yeah, I think that we hide from God. We want to hide all the failures, and the shame makes us hide. But every single time, like at my worst, I know he was there, and I'm just so sure of that now. I might not have seen it at the time, but I just really feel that he was pursuing me the whole time. He was always like the story of the lost sheep that Jesus told, that he was looking for me and trying to draw me back to where I could be free. And that surprised me, I guess, because I felt like I didn't deserve that, because I was making wrong choices. And I think we fall into that thinking all the time, and it keeps us away from God, and we need to just keep pursuing him. And I feel like I was trying, but there was a bit of a block there, and it was only by him like pursuing me that I came through it, I feel.
Right. And you felt that the entire time you had said that he was pursuing you through the whole time, and that finally at the end you were in a place where you could listen, and that the guilt wasn't as strong a block to that.
Yeah.
So also through this experience, you say 2 years to a day. So before and after that event, had you shared any of this with other members, like close friends who, members of the church and stuff like that? Had you shared this experience with them, and what was their reactions? Like, has there been any surprises or any positive or negative surprises with how the church community has acted around this story?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I tried to hide a lot of it, but I did share with people from time to time. Back when I first recognized the problem, I was in a life group, and I shared with the ladies in my group what was happening, and because it was brand new to me, I'm like, why am I behaving like this? And they were really supportive.
I think that's a good encouragement, that they were very supportive. I think people watching, if you kind of understand why we're doing this, it's encouraging to hear that you got support. Because oftentimes in the church, back what I was saying before, we have this weird mindset, and sometimes it comes from very real events in our past, unfortunately. But we have this mindset that we're alone in what we're doing, and if we're not alone, and if we are alone, that means as soon as we say, "Oh, I feel like I'm failing in this way. Can I get some encouragement here, some support here?" We're going to be met with people who are perfect, who don't understand, who are judgmental in a negative way. And such, and it's really, really nice to hear a personal story of support instead. And I think there's more stories like that than we are aware of, especially if you're not in the church, or maybe you've recently left the church. There's more stories than you're aware of that, and that our worst moments can sometimes be shared. And often when they are shared, we find out that everyone else has had similar moments in different things.
Yeah, and so I mean, I had that experience, which was good when I first shared, and that caused in me a desire to do better, I guess. And so I did have a period of time when I wasn't drinking after I had shared that with them. But it was almost like when I failed at that, it was hard for me to share again. And that was on me. Like I know that they would have been supportive and stuff like that, and then. But
it's almost, well, if you're anything like me, you want the realization that you're struggling, you want the solution to that be simultaneous with the realization. So you feel like, okay, I got this, and then you fail again, and you think, well, it should have been solved when I acknowledged it. And that we forget that it's a 10-year journey.
Yeah,
or a lifetime
exactly.
journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, at times with other things. I think that's why support is so needed again and again and again and again. But we so often go, "Ah, I'm supposed to have fixed this already. Didn't I already just share?"
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
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 And I mean, part of my reason for sharing this too is that I think that somehow we as Christians think that everybody has it together, and you don't know what someone's really going through. And I had one friend in this journey too who was very open that she struggled a bit with alcohol, and that was helpful too, because to hear, oh, somebody else like struggles with this.
Yeah.
And that's why I have felt now I'm like, I need to share this, that people know that it's not, you know, like there's other people that do as well. And I mean, it might not be alcohol. There's so many different things that can pull us in. And I think it's important we share, and we can help each other.
Definitely. Is there anything else, Esther, that you were thinking of along these lines that you wanted to, like, you've been very encouraging for anybody watching this, either live with us now or perhaps anytime in the future you might stumble across this video. Who knows what the YouTube algorithm will do with us later. But you shared a very personal story very bravely, and as well as stories of support and stories of victory. This is a very positive story. In this case, it's a story of victory and of healing. Is there anything else you wanted to share that you wanted people to know about this journey?
I mean, the thing I just really want people to know is that you're not any less loved by God because you struggle. I think it's like part of being who we are. And I know I've already said that, but I can't say it enough that right where you are now, God is still there for you. And if you keep seeking him and you keep coming to him, that's where the freedom is. And I think that is key, I guess.
I think it's hugely key. Thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you very much for sharing that. I just kind of want to say again to our viewers, I said this at the end of things yesterday, that our church has been operating for quite a while, and Esther's been here since you were little. And I've been here 15 years or so, and we both have either encountered stories with other people or very much have our own stories. And so hopefully this experience with yourselves has made this a little bit of less of an intimidating building. I mentioned to Esther before we started that church services on Sunday can sometimes relationally feel like Facebook. It's our best hour and a half. You know, we get ready for it. We get mentally ready for it as well as physically ready for it. That whole process, you know, you're going to go to church, you're going to sing, you're going to pray, you're going to listen to a sermon, watch your kids run around, teach Sunday school. And then the living rooms happen, and the person you were sat across from church says, hey, I struggle with alcohol. But if all you've done is had the experience of walking to a church, it can be very intimidating. And hopefully this has opened up your eyes a little bit into the people that you're sitting next to have stories, and those stories sound like yours. And they have been on the continuum wherever you're at, be it at the beginning, the middle, the struggling end, 8 years in, 18 years in, 28 years in. We all are on those moments. I also want to say that through this series, Duff and I have been talking through quite a few weeks, and both of us are very intellectually minded, but that our ways of talking through, thinking through your faith, they're connected to real stories, both in our lives and others. So this isn't a concept that we participate in. God isn't a concept. God is a person that we have a relationship with through his son Jesus by the power of his Spirit. Something very real, something even weird to say. Something even weird to believe if you step back from it a little bit. And hopefully today we've reduced that weirdness a little bit, in that how you can think through your faith helps change your behavior. Who you know God to be and who you know his children to be, and that he calls you his child and a member of his children, that will help change your behavior. That love by God becomes very real and not a concept. So throughout this series, as we explore the concepts, it's connected to very real stories. I just want to thank Esther for coming in.
You're welcome.
And is there anything else at all?
No, I'm
Okay,
good.
very good. Thank you very much for sharing. We are here every 2 weeks. We'll probably take a break sometime around Christmas, but I think we'll be here next week, 2 weeks from now at least. If you have any questions, please send in. Today's story with Esther is in part because we always extend the invitation. If you've got faith stories that connect to what you've learned about God through Scripture, through your life, how has that changed in thinking, changed your behavior? And it could be stories, it could be an expertise that you have to share. Maybe in your career, maybe there's something that you can think through. How should Christians behave along here? And I've got something to say about it, not just my personal story. We want to do a lot of that as well. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.